quarterly slush pile. We take more time than other editorial boards, but we stand behind our methodology, so much so that we're going to share our process with you through this podcast. Welcome to our editorial table. I'm Kathleen Volkmiller, and I am co-editor of the Painted Bride Quarterly, and I run the graduate program in publishing here at Drexel University, where this podcast is being recorded. I publish creative nonfiction and personal essay. I've been in Salon and New York Times, and I have a piece coming out in Oprah next month, so I'm really excited about that. And I love just saying that, Oprah. I would, in the studio with me today is Isabella.
Hello, I'm Isabella Fidanza, and I'm an English major at Drexel, and I've been a reader for the PBQ board for over a year and have done internships with the Drexel Publishing Group 3 consecutive times, and I've had a real blast, so I'm really thrilled to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, Jason Schneiderman, I'd like you to tell us a bit about yourself and make sure you tell us where you are right now so I can picture you.
This is Jason Schneiderman. I am at a yellow Parsons table that my husband bought at a thrift store decades ago that I use as a desk in our office/guest room in our brownstone in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, although it's not really a brownstone. We had the brownstoning done ourselves. It's actually a brick.
I love your honesty.
I am the associate editor at Painted Bride Quarterly. I am an assistant professor at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. I have written 3 books of poems, and I am the editor of Oxford University Press's collection Queer, A Reader for Writers, which is a freshman composition text.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Every episode is exciting to me, and today's is especially exciting because we're doing 2 new things that we hope to do on the regs, and one of them is to have an alumni guest editor with us today, and we are honored beyond belief to welcome Major Jackson. Hey,
Good
Maj.
afternoon. Hello.
Hi. Tell us about yourself and where you are right now.
Sure. I'm Major Jackson, and I feel like I'm moonlighting right now because I'm poetry editor of the Harvard Review, and I teach at the University of Vermont. We are on spring break, so I am talking or hanging out from Oviedo, Florida, where my wife lives, and right now I'm looking at palm trees sway in the wind.
That sounds really nice.
Very nice. Very
We're in a
nice.
partner meeting in an hour.
Well, you win. I'm in a cozy audio studio, but it's probably as opposite world as I can be from Florida looking at palm trees. It's all soundproofed and modern and lovely and cozy. We'll just hold hands, Isabella, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Marion Wren, my co-editor, is going to join us a little bit late today. So when she does, we'll make sure that we have her come in and say hi. But we should just jump right into the work today. All of the poems can be found on our podcast notes, which are found at our PBQ site, pbq.drexel.edu. We're going to start with 3 poems from Kathleen Sheeder Bonnano. These were submitted for an unthemed issue, but I'd like to start off by saying that I think these next poems would be very well suited for our locals issue. So our call for papers on the locals issues was simply, let us be able to read your poem and not have to read your bio, right? So we want to know where you're writing from. And I think these meet that criteria. Who would like to start off the reading? Who would like to read 30th Street Station?
I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
30th Street Station. Sweet old man in a tweed cap, soft shoes, soft brown skin, says, "Do you need a cab?" "Yes," I say, and my heart is laughing. This is how I get sometimes. "You look like my 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Richmond." "I always loved Mrs. Richmond," he says. He ushers me to a silver Lexus. "This is not a cab." This is a bait and switch. Behind the wheel, the driver, 300 pounds of muscle, arms like hams, a diamond ring on each pinky, a diamond in each earlobe, a red baseball cap backward. I think a piece of his ear is missing. I think he has a tattoo on his face. Our eyes meet in the rear view mirror. Clang, clang goes my danger meter. Don't get in the car, says everyone. So I get in the car. By 45th and Locust, turns out his name is Steve. Turns out he buried his younger sister this year and his mom the year before. She was way too easy on his brother with cerebral palsy, 51 years old and doesn't like to get out of bed. I read him a poem about my daughter from my book, and then he wants to remember my name and gets out a tiny pencil to write it down.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, this poem kind of makes me think about the cliche that we say about movies, like it made me laugh, it made me cry. I wonderfully get pulled all over the place emotionally with this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I mean, to some extent, I'm a sucker of poems that kind of do a reverse of the portrait of someone that is kind of opens the poem, such that by the end, there is this kind of profound humanizing of someone that we or others, some people might encounter as dangerous. And often I'm not a fan of work that is as accessible as this. But I think when it's done well, it kind of matches up with the material. And this is an everyday person, and so it makes sense that there's not much kind of in the way of high rhetorical language or even a kind of formalism to the poem.
That's really interesting. That even how you started this, that you're not necessarily usually a fan of poems that are this accessible. There really is nothing to unpack here. It's clear and direct, and
well, but I was going to say, do you think, because I think you and Major and I know the story of what happened to her daughter,
right?
And so a poem about meeting a stranger who should seem scary but turns out not to be, against, I don't know, to the Isabella, do you guys know what happened to Kathy's daughter and what the book of poems?
So as someone with no context, I mean, I do, I follow Major's train of thought in terms of, I guess, being a little surprised that there isn't anything as to unpack, as Kathy phrased it. But I guess for me, the reason why the approachability works is you get this sense that the speaker of the poem is a little rebellious, but I think rebellious in a way, really refusing to take people at face value, you know, their surface level appearance. So I think this kind of revelation that comes up at the end of the poem doesn't feel hokey. It feels like an organic, emotion that this person is experiencing. So I think that's probably why it worked for me, despite the fact that everything is quite simplistic and laid out on the table.
Yeah.
But no, I don't have the context that you guys probably do. So.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's necessary, though, Jason. Are you saying that you think one?
Well, I mean, yeah, her daughter was killed by a partner. And
sure.
So the contrast of someone, you know, that one feels safe with the people one knows, but is often not.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas one often feels unsafe with the people one doesn't know, but often is.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying I don't think that that's necessary. Maybe that's adding another level for you.
Yeah.
A layer of richness that, but I don't know if it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, having that knowledge certainly does add some richness to it, but without it, I do think that you still get something out of the piece. But it's good to know what's going on there anyway.
Mm-hmm. One of the in terms of the debate of I do feel as though if somehow the poem, well, this is interesting because I do believe there's something to be said for a body of work and how poems kind of speak back to or add to what we come to know of a poet's kind of material. And Kathy's terrific book kind of laid out for her that this is important subject matter and one that will probably inform the work to come. So on some hand, I don't think it needs to embed that specific history. It's already self-reflexive enough in that kind of final stanza that the speaker is a poet, that the speaker has published a book, that the speaker has written a poem about her daughter. What I find most compelling is that last statement. He wants to remember my name, gets out a tiny pencil to write it down. I've had that same experience, not in the same context, but just the humanizing kind of exchange between strangers who have met, who want to somehow stay in each other's lives. And that ending image I found, along with the repetition that is used in the poem to help create some sort of music or sonic texture to this anecdote. I found it quite convincing. Yeah.
I love the tiny pencil.
Yeah.
I love the tiny pencil. His like giant, big, meaty hand.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great image.
Yeah.
For sure.
And I don't know why I like this a lot too, but when she says, I think a piece of his ear is missing, I think he has a tattoo on his face. Like she's trying to not stare too hard.
Yeah.
I like that a lot too. I like all that specificity. And then the tiny pencil does add so much. It isn't just he wrote it down. He gets out a tiny pencil to write it down. I love that.
There's lots of this poem kind of defies a lot of typical poetry workshop do's and don'ts. And one of them that annoys me is somehow we have banned exclamation points from poems. And I understand the logic why, which is they carry so much emotion that should be found in the language and in the form itself. Mm-hmm. But again, who came up with this is there some sort of committee that said this year we will ban exclamation points? And you see them working here.
Right.
No, that's true.
I also, there's something silly about the scene, don't get in the car, says everyone.
Says everyone.
I would say it's sort of from like a children's book or something. I mean, obviously, you can't have everyone in the entire, this chorus rule is like, don't get in the car.
Well,
and it's sort of a beautiful, moment.
Yeah. And the exclamation points are both in someone else's voice, Major. That's why she's allowed, I think. That's why the poetry police aren't going to get her. Because
except for the second stanza from the bottom, that's hers, I think.
Well, but you know what? It feels to me, so the line is, she's telling us what the driver's telling her. And one of the things is he lost his sister, he lost his mom. And then he says, she was way too easy on his brother with cerebral palsy, 51 years old and doesn't like to get out of bed. I think the emphasis was the drivers. She's quoting the driver. Right.
And just because we're sort of, I think, touching on this, I guess it's really a dark humor that's poking out in between the lines of the poem. Those couple of lines about the cerebral palsy really stuck in my head. It's just, if Tim Fitz was here, who's one of our other editorial board members, I think he would probably say something like, I'm going to be thinking about a phrase for months, because I think it really gives you this idea here that the subject matter that's being woven throughout the poem is dealing with these sort of hard themes, but it's addressing it in a way that's an everyday kind of a scene. And we've got this humor to it because we have a scene where the writer is trying to not be judgmental and is discovering things along the way. So I think that is a great use of an exclamation point, just using that to quote the driver.
Yeah. Well, I think last episode we decided that if we're all I think we're all on the same page, that we're not needing to make any points. I think it might be time to vote. I feel a little uncomfortable because we're an even number right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, dear.
Until Marion joins us, there's a high chance of an arm wrestling contest breaking out. But let's try.
I'm an excellent arm wrestler online.
If Major and Jason can just text their votes, and Isabella and I will do the PBQ 1, 2, 3 shoot in the studio.
All right.
1,
Let's go.
2, 3, shoot. What do we have from the internet? The suspense is killing me.
I'm sorry, I can't find the text spot. I had the text window last time and I don't have the text spot this time.
Major, do you have the text box?
I do not either. I'm trying to.
It should be on the right-hand side.
I'm actually texting you.
Your Hangout.
On my phone.
You're going to text my cell phone?
Yes, I'm texting your cell phone because I don't have the box.
Okay. Major, you want to text me as well until you find
Sure,
the
that's
text
a good
box?
idea. Yeah.
Bear with us as we maneuver through the technical difficulties.
Like, you think you have these things worked out.
We'll be, we're holding our listeners in such suspense over our vote here. I see Jason's. And we have 2 more from Kathy, so this will be great. We're waiting. And it is a yes. It's a unanimous yes.
4 virtual thumbs up.
Thank goodness. 4 thumbs up. Alrighty then. So great way to start episode 4. And let's move on to the pool. Who's going to read that one?
I'll do this one.
Thank you, Isabella.
Okay. The pool. My 15-year-old son, adopted from Chile, pedals his bike back from the pool. Says some boys just called him a spick, and my brain explodes. Ping, ping, says my brain. Wait, says Louie. I get in the car, gun the gas pedal, stomp past 2 teenage lifeguards at the gate. On my way to the deep end. Did you call my son a name? I call across the water. To 2 skinny white boys, no older than 12, their goose-pimpled arms hugging their concave chests. They nod. Any minute, they might cry and their mothers might come over. Listen, you. Words hurt. I am yelling. Don't ever say that word again. Do you understand? Or I'll come back here and beat the shit out of you. Do you understand? Open-mouthed, they nod. Maybe I didn't make that threat aloud, but we all heard it. At home, Louis said he was holding their heads underwater for fun, which is why they got mad in the first place.
So while we process that poem, I'm going to welcome Marion Wren to the podcast. She's here with us now. Hi, Mare.
Hi, everybody. Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Marion.
Welcome.
I'm so glad you said yes to Kathy's first poem.
Yeah. So,
Hi, Major.
So jump in the pool with us immediately, Mare.
Oh my God, that last stanza, that just like breaks my heart and makes me laugh and makes me love this poet's righteousness and indignation and humiliation. So I'll say that there's something about the way it sort of torques and captures all 3 of those emotions in its little final curtsy.
Yeah, the reversal at the end definitely made this for me. And I like the fact that we have this I think the tone is not that the writer is defending her son, which I appreciate. There's no sugarcoating at the end. It's kind of just leaving it as is for the readers to also feel this sense of indignation. And I really appreciate that she left that intact.
Yeah.
That's a nice way to put it.
Yeah, to me, the the turn at the end is just a wonderful way of complicating a narrative that most parents would understand and connect with. I mean, there's that kind of parenting that is just visceral, where you just want to protect your kid, particularly, in this day and age, children of color. And so the fact that the kid is up to their own kind of
mischief.
Mischief.
Unfortunate mischief, maybe.
Kind of undercuts the indignation and makes it just a very real piece of truth, I would say. And that's one of my favorite values of poems, is where they give us a truth that I knew was there all along, but I'm reminded of it.
Yeah, that was a great way to put it. I really like the imagery in the third stanza that she gives us about the other boys, not necessarily emphasizing the fact of any particular race or even physical traits, but I think she really captures kind of the lameness and vulnerability of kids who tease other kids at this age, just really emphasizing the fact that they're skinny, they're sort of just vulnerable and hugging their arms against their chests and really aren't that tough after all when they're confronted with some kind of real world element. And I just really like that she brought that to life, for older readers especially.
Yeah, I want to jump in one more time and just say there's really something so delightful in the three ways the narrative kind of works, and that I is working here. It's like she's a participant in this event, right? And she's recalling it for us, and sort of like just witnessing what happened and participating and yelling. And then the reversal at the end reminds us that it's actually an apology too. Like there's a quality of regret, of being played, of, you know what I mean? Of being caught up in that visceral response. So it's a tight, tightly compacted, array of emotions that she gets at with this seemingly straightforward story.
Yeah. And, I'm glad you just said straightforward story, because I really appreciate at the end that we get two surprises, right?
Yeah.
Because when she says, "I'm going to beat the shit out of you," do you understand? I believe she's really saying it, right?
Right.
So that line, maybe I didn't make that threat aloud, but we all heard it. Yeah. I'm laughing aloud at that, right? And then we get the reveal. And then it makes you go back to the first stanza, and Louis says, "Wait." Right? Louis says, "Wait," when she's just in the car, going to take care of these kids. And, I can just feel all of those emotions. But when we see Louis saying, "Wait," you just think any kid doesn't want his mom tearing down to the pool to yell at people. Right? So it's just kind of like reward for reading,
I like maybe it's just me feeling this way, but I think there's a quality of hyperbole to the whole crafting of the poem that I like, because I think maybe it's just the intensity of the imagery of gunning the gas pedal, jumping in the car. I sort of feel like it's a little short cartoon, and Supermom is jumping in the car and is going to go and talk to these kids and put them in their place. So I think that there's still this element of humor that's being brought in here, even though, again, the topic is important to her as a mother and serious to her as a mother. But I like the fact that it's not too aggressive. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know. Again, that could just be me bringing that. But
well, always, right? Jason, do you have anything to say, or should we?
No, I don't know. I guess I'm sort of on a different place. The reversal for me was a little distressing. I don't know. I there's this, I know I'm being humorless here, but there's this part of me that almost is distressed that the last stanza sort of says that he brought it on himself. And I don't know, I'm having I felt like a lot of the moves that worked really well in the last poem don't work as well for me here, particularly with in the power dynamics, the son is 15 and the kids who are being critiqued are 12 and small and tiny. and he's clearly like much bigger than they are. I don't know. Like I there's this part of me that's sort of like, you know, because I feel like the suggestion is that she wouldn't have done this if she knew the full circumstances. And then I feel like, is this a justification of using a racial slur in order to like get back at someone with more power than you? Which I know is may make me seem like a little, I guess SJW or politically correct, but I don't know. There was a lot about it where like the dynamics kind of felt, the racial dynamics felt more fraught to me than the poem was kind of giving them credit for being.
Mm-hmm. I'll add a little to that. I mean, just in terms of the racial politics of America, the pool has been, you know, one of those kind of contested sites that kind of makes, that is both, it makes kind of headline news, right. But also one of those things that you can kind of see people in the privacy of their own homes kind of talking about, well, you know, you go to this pool, you don't go to that pool, you know, thinking about that period. And I think this poem kind of asserts that there's still a little bit more work to be done around it. And so all those kind of power dynamics that you're talking about, I think, you know, kind of, again, get at the complexity of it all. Like we haven't, you know, in this so-called post-racial, post-Obama world, kind of transcended these things. And I think you're right to feel a sense of ambivalence about the mother's role and the speaker. I don't think the speaker is saying in the end that the kid brought it upon himself, but again, just kind of alluding at what is one of the real truths about interaction between kids. No one is angelic in some of these stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, and not that it is necessary for the poem, but I mean, we don't really know, I guess, exactly the kind of, I kind of assumed that this was a city setting, but it could be a suburban setting, in which case there might be I guess, slightly different implications there, but really good things that you pointed out, Major. Some really nice stuff.
And I wonder, Kathleen, was it submitted for the locals issue, or was this just a straight submission to the file?
I had mentioned that they were submitted to unthemed, but I think they all three of the ones we're discussing would work for locals. They were submitted for unthemed, but I think they all speak to locals.
So I asked that because I think the way she's even got her lines sitting, like, did you call my son a name, or listen you, words hurt, and even beat the shit out of you, do you understand? Like, there's the way they sit on the line, I can just so hear a regional accent. Like, it just sounds so, like, very much like a Philadelphia threat, right? Like, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you.
Sounds Philly.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It does. Yeah. I think we should vote. I vote that we vote. If Major and Jason weren't able to find their text area on the Hangout, so you can all three text me if you want. You can all three text me if you want then.
Wait, Kathy, I can't text you. And I can't find the text button on the Hangouts either, so I'm going to join that team.
You can the text box in the email. So if you go to Gmail, you should go.
Fancy. All right. Yeah. No. Okay.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So Isabella and I are going to do the 1, 2, 3 shoot in person.
All right.
You guys text away. 1, 2, 3 shoot. I got a yes from Florida. I got 1 no.
It was a yes from Abu Dhabi.
And a yes from Abu Dhabi. So it is in. It's 4-1. So PBQ's democracy. All right. Let's move on. We got one more from Kathy. It's Jerzee's Bar. I live in New Jersey, so I'm gonna read this.
All right, cookie.
All right. It's different though. Jerzee's Bar. I love my rum and coke. I love everybody tonight. Even the young roofer who has drunk himself shit-faced on Budweiser. He stands very still, tries not to wobble when he, sees his reflection in the mirror behind the bar. Seems I've known this guy all my life. Tomorrow morning he'll show up at his mom's house, all scraped up with a chipped tooth and a story about some asshole in the bar. Should I take his keys? Should I save him from himself? Should I call somebody who loves him? I sip my drink. I smile at the band. Tap, tap, tap goes my foot.
So you can't see this if you're not looking at the actual manuscript, but that line tries not to wobble when he, that's set off with commas and italics. And I love that switch into his voice.
Yeah.
That's really.
These, the poems are all on the PBQ website, so they will be able to read along with us. Yeah, you can
I thought this was really successful. I enjoyed this a lot.
Jason, we are on opposite sides of the room today. I think the title is terrific, but I think it's hard to open up a poem with "I love fill in the blank." The sentiment I understand, that kind of, particularly when you're slightly inebriated and being a good drunk many times in my life, you just love the world.
Sure.
I think I'm not sure if that's the most fruitful opening, however. I was lost after that opening stanza.
Yeah, I actually really like the direction that the poem goes in, but I do feel like the first stanza is not the strongest opening that there could have been for this, so that was a little disappointing. I almost wish I could take one of the later stanzas and throw it up at the beginning, almost as a bold way to just see how we're gonna do this. But
it's not okay that she's just setting up the scene, because it immediately jumps from her to the roofer, right? I love my rum and coke, and then the whole rest of the poem's about the roofer until it comes back to her deciding to chill again.
I think almost if you could have just taken the first stanza out and started with the second stanza, it would even be a little bit more captivating. But
oh no, I'm going to stick with my love for "I love my rum and coke." I think that's a great opening line. Because I love my rum and coke.
All right, if whatever we decide on this poem, maybe that's the T-shirt slogan for this podcast. I want to talk about the shift at the end, right? So here we have it again. I sip my drink, I smile at the band, tap, tap, tap goes my foot. And there is such like a kind of dangerous ambivalence there. Like the place she lands is like, I don't know if she's back in love with the place or she's distanced from it, or if she's like letting him drive off into his chipped tooth. Like what, I think this right for me, the sense of the poem is it fuzzes out right there. So it's hard for me to know what the intention is. And yet I have to tell you, like, I love being in this bar. There's something about I know that bar. I know that it feels rich and richly detailed in the sparseness of what she gives us, but I can't quite figure the emotion that she's coming upon.
I thought it was a rescue fantasy that's kind of abandoned because the speaker knows that she doesn't have the power to do that, right? So it's sort of fantasizing about taking this roofer's keys, about, rescuing him, but you can't, right? I mean, the speaker can't. And so she goes back to drinking.
Yeah.
I sort of enjoyed that moment of kind of recognizing the person, fantasizing about rescue, and then sort of letting that go.
Yeah, I agree. That's how I read it as well. It was really simple. It just made a full circle for me. This roofer coming across her perception of, as she's enjoying her drink in the bar, he is a momentary blip across her screen. And, you know, maybe if it didn't say I smile at the band and I sip my drink that we already know she loves, right? She's back grooving, and that moment of thinking about the roofer's over.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't, like Marianne, able to decide if the smile is just a smile of bliss or a smile of kind of deviousness, but either way, definitely the line about calling somebody who loves him is a clue, and that this is a fantasy of some sort, so I think that certainly works fine. Do you like the detail about
I
the
don't know. I think this poem is lacking in authenticity. I think it's reliant on a class portrait that I find doesn't kind of push me beyond familiar kind of.
It is familiar.
You know, it's Jerzee, roofer, he's drunk, chip tooth. I don't know. It's
so homesick. Oh my gosh.
I think there's something overly familiar with this.
Yeah.
With this scenario that I think that, you know, the ending feels authentic in terms of, you know, do you help this person? But it doesn't plumb enough of the again, the complexity of the situation. I don't mind setup, but I think I just want a little bit more from the poem and what's here.
That makes sense. I mean, the poem itself, I think, is not a lot. This isn't about a lot. It's about sitting in a bar and seeing this dude and having these
Major,
thoughts.
does it make any difference if this is for the locals issue, if you think about it in terms of theme rather than kind of poem qua poem?
No, in fact, I think that criteria puts an even greater pressure or demand, because if someone is reading this as a Jerzee or
Philly, I think.
A Philly person, then I think what happens is they're gonna be aware of that, and there'll be the kind of the mirror thrown up to life moment of recognition. But don't we go to art to kind of penetrate beyond those kind of surface projections? Otherwise, we are just throwing up a mirror around us and not coming to understand in the way that good art does some of what we might not have noticed before.
Yeah, we certainly don't get, in terms of a picture of this person, is if she's just writing the poem because it's something that she happened to notice, it doesn't seem like it's quite good enough. I mean, if this person has a compelling look, or there's something about him that made her notice him, or there's something more to the situation where it's true that we're not getting that conveyed. So that's a fair point.
Should we vote?
I think so. I think we should vote. So, remote voters and in the studio, here we go. 1, 2, 3, vote. Okay, so there are 4, it's 3 no's, 2 yeses. So that's a no for Jerzee's bar. And I think Kathleen Sheeder Bonnano did pretty well, though. We took 2 out of 3. That ain't bad. Yeah. So looking at the time and having a question for you guys, we can read the 3 poems that came about the Monsters issue, or we can have our first ever occasional segment. Want to vote on what do you want? You want to feel like reading more poetry, or feel like having a conversation?
Let's go for the conversation. Let's mix it up.
One vote for the conversation.
That. I like that idea.
All right, cool. Well, that's enough voices. That's enough votes. We're moving on then. So we'd like to do some special things on certain episodes, and what we're going to do today is one of our occasional segments This segment is called Something Random I Saw in a Literary Magazine This Week. So this week I was on Carve magazine. It's run out of Texas and publishes only fiction and derives its name and ideology from Raymond Carver. And on their submit page, they make you an offer. If you become a subscriber at the time of submission, they promise to get you a response on your work faster, within 2 weeks. This flipped me out a little bit, but I didn't even think about it and kept like surfing around. And then I was on Cleaver magazine. Why I was on Carve and Cleaver, I don't know what was going on in my brain. But and they have a super complicated process where they said their free submissions were currently closed. But if you paid them $5, you could still submit now. Plus, in all genres, a voluntary $10 tip jar fee will guarantee an expedited answer within 2 weeks. Unless, of course, you're submitting prose. So for fiction, flash, and nonfiction, your voluntary tip jar donation is $25 and guarantees a 2-week expedited answer and a personal response from one of the editors. So that did stop me dead in my tracks. I just thought, is this like crazy genius and helpful to authors or downright mercenary, right? And I talked with some other poets and a couple, like one of our editors, Paul Siegel, is really actively submitting all the time. He just sends out his work constantly, and he said he's been seeing this for a while now. So I'm wondering what I mean, this is a thing now? This is what we're doing?
The fuck?
I think that's telling.
Yeah?
I mean, I think it goes back to what we were saying earlier about, I mean, even this, right? Like that we're blurring that line between what used to be private and what used to be public. And I've often, talked to people, talked to students about how the workshop structure, kind of that Iowa workshop where you're all quiet while someone talks about your work, that started in the 1930s, is really a way of allowing yourself to be in the room for an editorial process. And it's not an accident that as submissions became more anonymous to bring in larger groups of people, academia and the workshop system gave you a way to be in that space, even when you weren't in that space. And I think the lines used to be much clearer. And, I've given a number of talks about, publishing and kind of said, you should pay someone to be a teacher. You should not pay someone to read your work. And what has happened is that line between who's your teacher and who's reading your work has collapsed, right? So when they're saying, if you give us $10, we'll read it faster. If you give us $25, we'll give you feedback, right? That's bringing together those two roles. And I don't want to say that it's, I don't want to be judgmental before I'm analytic, but I definitely think that it's a response to what people want. What people want is fast responses, and what people want is editorial feedback. And so it's not surprising that those are becoming things that you can pay for. There was one more thing I wanted to say, but I forgot what it is. So when I remember, I'll say it again.
Maybe it'll come to you.
Well, I'm thinking about it from the editorial side. I'm not sure about folks at Painted Bride Quarterly, but at Harvard Review, we're very much inundated with submissions. And we read chiefly chronologically. As the work comes in, we give priority to the oldest submissions. We know it's a lot of work for the most part, is uncompensated for.
Yeah.
There's, professional development or there's other sorts of non-monetary value to the work that we do. But for the most part, there's no compensation for this. This is a love of labor. I'm not surprised in this day and age that someone could see an opportunity, a business opportunity or model
right.
that they want to capitalize on as it relates to their time in the office, out of the office, family, and put a dollar value to it. So to some extent, I both applaud it. It's not something that I see us doing at the Harvard Review, but it also goes back to what my friend Jason was just saying, is that what people want is not just the swiftness of a response, yes or no, but truly writers are hungry for feedback.
Yeah.
And they're hungry for feedback that will help them break through what some of them see as a very highly guarded space of conversation and privilege that they want to be a part of, and any means by which they can, and that's where someone who has a business mind will kind of leap to the chance and opportunity to give them that. They're no different to me than the writers who advertise in the back of Poets and Writers. Send me your manuscript and I will do a manuscript evaluation. The only difference is this is piecemeal.
Yeah. But you know what? There is a difference, though. I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't have conflated both these magazines, because the one place is just saying speedy response for cash, and the other place is saying speedy response and critique for cash. And I think I hear both Major and Jason distinct, like accepting or allowing or understanding better when someone's paying for their critique. But there are many magazines that are charging folks to respond fast, so they reject you faster, right? I mean, that is what's most likely to go down, right? Painter Bread Quarterly, right. We accept about 1.7% of what we receive, and that's probably the numbers for any magazine of our level, right? So I think, you're rolling that dice, and most of the time you will be rejected. So
I was going to say, I also see a very distinct difference between encouraging subscription and kind of demanding subscription and paying for faster responses or charging a submission fee. Because that also begins to look to me like contest fees, right? I mean, so many poetry presses over the last 15, if you go back to the 1970s, there really aren't that many first book contests, right? I mean, there's the Yale Younger, and it's a big deal because there just aren't that many. And now, we're awash in poetry contests, in large part because it's a way for poetry presses and presses that publish poetry to be able to manage themselves financially. And if everyone were buying books, they wouldn't have to do this. If there were a huge market for all of these books that were being published, the response and poetry and for a while, I mean, I remember this was a huge thing in like 2003, 2004, and like Rebecca Wolf, and there was all this, people were really angry. And I think it was Rebecca Wolf who kind of came along and said, like, look, we're not getting rich on these contest fees, right? I mean, there was this perception, it was particularly around poetry, right? There was this perception that these contests were incredibly exploitative and that somebody was getting very, very wealthy on all of these contest submissions. And the truth is, no one's getting wealthy on these contest submissions. That really, those entry fees are just keeping the press, not even keeping the press afloat, just keeping that one book that they publish afloat. I talking to Richard Sykin about this right after he won the Yale Younger, and he was submitting his manuscript and saying, like, this is just me supporting poetry, right? Like, this is just me. Like, I don't expect to win, but I know that if I don't do this, that these presses go under.
But look what the contests are a different thing. You're talking about first books. So what you're gambling on is getting a book published, getting a whole book made, right? A chapbook made, or winning a contest that almost always has a cash prize. I'm talking about regular submissions here, single submissions that where you will just be in a literary magazine.
But I think it's a response to the same condition.
It's less of a reward, is what I'm saying. You're laying down money for less of a reward to be one of many in an anthology.
But what if someone tips? What if someone tips well beyond the $25? Isn't there a bit of pay to play going on here? I mean,
well, that's what I'm afraid of. I think
I guess that's it. It's like you throw money at it, and suddenly you're fast tracked. Right. And that takes the sort of the aesthetic rigor out of the deal. Right. Or the luxurious moment of finding a diamond in the slush pile. Right. And I guess one of the things about what we're doing is like, we now have this podcast that is, pulling the veil back a little bit on our process, but it's also really a defensive gesture. We are slow, and we're slow because we do this, right? We actually have like deep and meaningful conversations about, each piece that comes to us, right? So part of me gets it. Like, I get why an editor would be like, you know what, that's actually worth some money. And if my reader knew, or if my submitter knew that we're doing this kind of thing, maybe I could find an exchange for that. Maybe there is some economic capital I could get for the labor put into that. But not if it's also attached to, and you jump to the front of the line, you get behind the gold. You know what I mean? Like you're on the red carpet, you get the special access.
It's the
right?
speed pass at the amusement park.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. It is.
It really is. That's right.
It's the easy
pass. Marion, I apologize for stepping on you talking, but I was going to say that, yes, it definitely creates the appearance of unfairness, right? It creates the appearance, obviously, if someone goes to the tip jar and puts in $10,000. But I think that situation has always existed. And I know I have definitely been in situations where people who gave a lot of money to an institution are making a demand that that the people of the institution are acquiescing to or trying to deal with. And it had nothing to do with tip jar.
Yeah. But I think just yes, right? So what you're looking at there is a clash between some, like, I don't know, historical model like patronage, right? And the internet, right? Like the sort of rise of a participatory form of communication. You get a wicked clash. On one hand, it feels like wickedly democratic. And on the other hand, it's also like, and as Major said, you pay to play, right? Like those two things are interestingly in tension, I think, on this one. So I don't know. I mean, should we do it? Should we be doing this?
Well, no. I vote no.
Other thing is,
there's a reason why, editorial and marketing, there's a thick wall in most magazine staff between editorial and marketing. You just don't want the people who are buying the biggest ads to start dictating what you can and cannot publish. And my problem with this tip jar donation is that it really starts becoming a kind of, I can see this becoming a vanity press kind of situation where someone puts in $100 and then suddenly editorial staff is feeling compelled to say yes to work that is mediocre at best, and not doing the art service. And I think ultimately that's what's getting lost here is the advancement of the finance over what should be the true mission of the magazine, which is to present the best work. And once you start accepting money, even for something like, well, let me give you some remarks on what you submitted, it's easily going to devolve into another kind of publication model.
Right. Yeah. I've been hesitant to jump in, but I think I'll just say from like an outside perspective, I feel like if I was submitting something, I would appreciate a magazine having a much more forthright sort of statement of like, hey, we need money to keep going, and what we need is for people to be subscribers, and maybe like combining, I guess, this idea of paying a little extra, you get a subscription or some kind of other thing, and maybe like a slightly expedited response, but I definitely think this idea of guaranteeing feedback for extra money, like I would always be suspicious no matter how much I paid. I think as a submitter, I would always like have this question in the back of my mind. If I'm paying somebody to give me feedback, supposedly it's going to be honest feedback, but how are you going to know that? If you're paying money, I feel like there's, for feedback specifically, I feel like there's a doubt that's a little different than like paying maybe for some other kind of thing to be going on, like a slightly expedited response, and then also having this combination of subscription or whatever. I mean, I think it definitely speaks to to publishing problems in general of people like not buying subscriptions, not supporting how things are being run. But I would just rather have a magazine have some kind of like forthright statement about this, and I would feel like then, at least if I was paying something, I would have a much better idea of where this was coming from. But that's just, my perspective. So I'm not coming at it from as much of a refined point of view, I think. But
I was going to say the other factor is that prior online submissions being the standard, simultaneous submissions really were frowned upon, and you couldn't do it because things weren't instantaneous. And so with people beginning to simultaneously submit and Submittable making it that much easier to do it, and with submission being so much easier and not having to, get your stamps out and lick your envelopes and all that kind of stuff, the number of submissions just increased so dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't think it's an accident. I mean, it's not, accident makes it like it's on purpose, but it is true that we are inundated by submissions in a way that we weren't before. Right. And it's almost like the copay that your insurance company demands so that you won't go see the doctor every 10 minutes if it were free. Mm-hmm. I mean, in a certain way, like that, those fees have kind of turned into like a copay to like make sure that you're not, over submitting.
Right. But I mean, we do know for a fact a couple of the magazines that started, I don't think I do want to name them, but a really big magazine that started accepting payment for regular submissions actually hoped they would be guarding the gate a little tighter and people would think a little harder before they submitted to them. And it's a nominal fee. It's maybe $3. And it has caused no difference whatsoever in the amount of submissions they've received. Oh, dear. And they were actually hoping it would stop it a little bit, that people would think a little harder. Like, if you guys remember, Painted Bride Quarterly, I was standing really firmly at that gate and saying no online submissions because I knew that there would be, we would be opening up the gates of hell in many, many ways. And, and we have. I mean, we consistently get submissions where people are sending to 20, 30 at a time. We get submissions where 3 days later they go, I've made revisions. They get their stuff published elsewhere and forget to tell us. Now that online submissions are as easy as they are, there's a bit of chaos surrounding the submission process itself.
I'm going to start referring to you, me, and Marion as Cerberus. Guarding the gates to hell. I tried very, very hard not to have a submission fee charged at Bellevue Literary Review, where I'm the poetry editor. And I was really, really angry about it because I really felt that, particularly with the people who are submitting to us, it was cruel to inflict even a nominal fee, like a $5, on submissions. And I have to say, it happened. It hasn't reduced the numbers of submissions. No one's complained about it. If people let us know that they can't afford the fee, then we do allow them to submit the work, and it's really made the magazine much more financially solid.
Yeah.
Oh, Jason, now everybody's going to submit to that journal and say, but I don't have any money.
I know, never. Really? That's going to your tax returns now.
We do need to start wrapping up, so let's get some final words on this idea.
I do want to say though, like I stick by the submission fee. At first, I had pretty cold feet about it, but I do think in this day and age, right, that a nominal fee on the submission to a magazine, and it is so easy to do through PayPal or so easy to do through whatever mechanism you're using. It is I don't know. Kathy once used the example. It's like, the SASY. It's just the extra step that you engage in, right, to circulate the work. And it legitimizes it in my mind these days. Like it doesn't just legitimize the thing that you're submitting, but it's legitimizing the submission process, which means there's somebody on the other end of it working for a magazine that's making peanuts, right? Little literary magazine with no budget, right? And this goes back to Isabella's point, like, being forthright about being broke is also not a unique story in the field of literary magazines, right? The rarer story is those who are flush. So how do we make our, lack of cash and our big hearts attractive enough that people start throwing cash at us? That's the question. So I would like to end my comments there and say whoever's listening should send us $20.
Right. And there's still a difference. Like if you charge everybody one fee and that's it, then there's still a democracy to it. And you're still, like Major said, you're going to publish the best work. If you say pay me extra and jump the line.
Yeah, as a young potential writer, I would say I'm all for paying nominal submission fee, and I definitely agree with Marian. I think this legitimizes the process, and I think anybody who is really passionate about the publishing industry in general should have some kind of like sympathy or understanding that if people aren't there to support it, it's like a print book. It's like anything print related, it's going to go poof. So I think that's fine, but I definitely feel like this tip jar setup is making me raise an eyebrow. So I can't be the only person who feels like that.
I think Major said the last word because he's our guest.
Yeah.
No, I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that, most of the arts everyone finds themselves in the same position of doing it as a labor of love, which has me believe at some point I would be down with this. I don't know, you would be down with this. Of paying some sort of like culture tax fee, where every household in the U.S. pays 3 cents towards the arts in the U.S. In lieu of that, submission fees make sense to me. I like your kind of metaphor that it's the SASY, and it also has us realize that the arts is its own particular economy, and just because someone sits at a desk and writes a short story or a poem that morning, that they're entering into an exchange. It's a kind of network of exchange. And oftentimes when you do that, whether you're kind of entering into a contemporary art center or a gallery, it's not free. There's overhead and administration. There's all sorts of costs associated with it. So it makes sense to me. And I believe even the kind of $2, $3, $5 submissions that people are paying is probably not enough. Eventually, we're going to see those fees eventually inflate to where they should be, probably somewhere between the $5 and $10 range. And I know some people are doing higher, but $10 seems about fair to me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate everybody's time and thoughts on this and would love to know what our listeners think. You can let us know on our Facebook page. The Abu Dhabi clock struck 10, and I think it's time for us to float on out of here. Thank you for your patience as we're learning as we go here in the world of podcasting. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, sign up for our email, and keep reading. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.